the ones that were hanging on trying to defend Stephanie White, a lot of you guys threw in the towel last night. Rocky IV style. Throw the towel. Throw the damn towel. Y'all threw it in. Watching that fiasco that played out in front of our face, and then the comments after the game where Stephanie White refuses to answer a direct question about Caitlin Clark and her performance last night.
When was the last time 1,600 empty seats cost a franchise its entire future? Not a slow decline, not a gradual fade, a sudden, violent rupture, the kind that sends shockwaves through ownership boardrooms, triggers emergency calls with sponsors, and forces general managers to stare at spreadsheets that no longer make sense. The Indiana Fever are living inside that rupture right now, and the epicenter has a name. Here's what nobody in the mainstream sports media wants to say out loud. This is not a basketball problem. This is a business catastrophe unfolding in slow motion, and the people who build it are still pretending the building isn't on fire. By the time this video ends, you'll know exactly whether Stephanie White survives this offseason. The answer is going to shock you. Let's start with what those 1,600 empty seats actually mean in dollars and cents. Because once you see the math, the fan rage stops feeling emotional and starts feeling completely rational. 1 season ago, the Indiana Fever were a financial phenomenon. Caitlin Clark didn't just sell tickets. She rewired the entire economic architecture of women's professional basketball. Corporate sponsors who had never looked twice at the WNBA were cutting 7-figure deals. Television networks were renegotiating rights packages in real time. Merchandise was moving at rates that made legacy NBA franchises jealous. The Simon family ownership group was sitting on a rocket ship, and all they had to do was not blow up the launch pad. They blew up the launch pad. Here's the dual reality that the front office refuses to acknowledge. Not only did Clark deliver the highest home attendance in Fever franchise history last season, but the ripple effect of her presence was actively inflating the valuations of every WNBA franchise simultaneously. She wasn't just their asset. She was the tide lifting every boat in the league. Game over. That context matters, because what's happening now isn't just the Fever losing fans. It's the Fever torching a gift that the entire sport has spent decades trying to earn. So who actually lit the match? That's the question the fan base is asking, loudly, financially, and with an organized precision that front offices are not used to seeing from WNBA supporters. This isn't a Twitter argument. This isn't a few angry comments after a bad loss. Fans are coordinating. They are consciously choosing to leave seats empty as a direct economic statement to the Simon ownership group. They understand something that took most franchises decades to learn. The only language ownership speaks fluently is revenue. And right now, the Fever faithful are speaking it at full volume. But here's what makes the situation genuinely different from your standard coaching controversy. And this is where most of the hot take commentary gets it completely wrong. The anger isn't just about wins and losses. Smart coaches lose games. Patient fan bases accept rebuilding. What this fan base will not accept, what no fan base built around a transcendent superstar will ever accept, is a feeling that the superstar is being actively suppressed, that her game is being constrained, that the system being run on the floor is fundamentally incompatible with the player, who is the entire reason anyone is watching. Think about what it feels like to buy a ticket to see a Ferrari and watch someone insist on driving it in second gear. That visceral frustration is exactly what 1,600 fans expressed. Not with signs, not with chants, but by simply not showing up. Stephanie White can win tactical arguments in film rooms. She can cite rotations and defensive schemes until the press conference runs cold. But she cannot argue with an empty seat. An empty seat is not an opinion. It is a financial verdict. And the verdict being delivered is devastating. The Fever's front office needs to understand something that the numbers are now screaming. There's a shrinking window between a course correction and a full institutional collapse. Fan bases that organize around economic protest don't simply calm down after a winning streak. They escalate. They remember. They tell others. Which brings us to the moment that didn't just anger the fan base. It detonated them. Because after the game, when the cameras were on and the questions were direct, Stephanie White stood at that podium and did something that no coach should ever do when their franchise player is at the center of a national conversation. She said nothing. Deliberately, pointedly, nothing. And what that silence communicated to an already erupting fan base is something that cannot be walked back with a post-game quote or a PR-managed statement. What exactly did she refuse to say, and why does it change everything? Silence is a choice, and some choices are unforgivable. When Stephanie White stood at that podium and deflected every direct question about Caitlin Clark's performance, not with a thoughtful answer, not with a coach's measured defense of her player, but with the kind of practice, hollow non-response that press offices rehearse for damage control situations, something irreversible happened. The fan base didn't just hear what she didn't say. They understood exactly why she didn't say it. And that understanding is what broke the dam. Here's what most commentary is missing about that press conference moment. A coach's public relationship with their franchise player isn't just optics. It is a living signal to every sponsor, every television executive, every potential season ticket holder watching from the outside. When that signal goes dark, when a coach cannot or will not publicly champion the player who is the economic engine of the entire organization, the business consequences begin immediately, not next quarter, not next season. Immediately. Ask yourself this. If you were a corporate sponsor with a 7-figure activation deal tied to Indiana Fever visibility, and you watched that press conference, what would your next phone call to your marketing team sound like? That call is already happening, in offices you'll never see. Now, let's talk about what the fan base did next, because this is a part of the story that separates this moment from every other coaching controversy in recent WNBA history. Meet the version of the Indiana Fever fan base that the front office never prepared for. Last season, these were the supporters packing every corner of the arena, driving the kind of electric atmosphere that made national broadcasters rethink how they covered women's basketball. They were loud, loyal, and economically generous in ways the franchise had never experienced. They were, by every measure, the perfect fan base for a franchise on a rise. But that loyalty had a foundation. And the foundation was the belief that the organization respected what they had. When that belief cracked, when game after game revealed a coaching philosophy that seemed allergic to maximizing Clark's impact, the loyalty didn't disappear. It transformed. It became organized resistance. Fan communities began coordinating. The message spreading through supporter groups shifted from frustration to strategy. Don't just complain. Don't just post. Withdraw your dollars and make them feel it. The empty seats weren't accidents. They were architecture. That is a different kind of fan revolt. And history tells us exactly how it ends. If this kind of insight into the business of basketball is hitting different for you right now, you already know why subscribing actually matters. This analysis doesn't show up in the highlight reels. More of it is coming. Don't miss it. Here's the historical reality that every Fever executive should have taped to their office wall. In the last 15 years of North American professional sports, every franchise that ignored a coordinated economic fan protest, rather than responding with decisive visible leadership changes, saw the situation escalate beyond the point of simple resolution. Not one exception. Organizations that moved fast, made hard calls, and communicated those changes directly to their fan base recovered. Some recovered spectacularly. The ones who waited, who issued careful statements and hoped the losing would stop on its own, they didn't just lose coaches. They lost cultural relevance. And in the modern sports economy, cultural relevance is the asset that actually drives valuation. The Fever aren't just risking a bad season. They are risking their place in the national conversation at the exact moment when the national conversation about women's basketball is worth more than it has ever been in history. Now here is where the story gets significantly darker for the ownership group, because the threat isn't just coming from the stands. Television partners and corporate sponsors operate on forward-looking confidence. They don't just measure what a franchise delivered last quarter. They model what it will deliver over the next 3 to 5 years. And right now, the models that matter, the ones being run in the offices of the people who write the biggest checks, are being quietly revised downward, not because the Fever lost games. Because the Fever appear to have no coherent plan for protecting and maximizing the asset that made those checks possible in the first place. That erosion of forward confidence is far more dangerous than any single losing streak. But here's the twist that almost nobody's talking about. The piece of this story that reframes everything you think you know about where the blame actually sits. Because Stephanie White may not be the deepest problem in that building. And if the fan base gets the coaching change they're demanding without understanding what's underneath it, they might win the battle and lose the entire war. What is actually happening inside that front office? And which name is already being whispered as the real architect of this disaster? The coach is the face of the fire, but someone else built the conditions that made it inevitable. Before this fan base gets exactly what it's demanding, before the press release goes out, before the podium gets a new face, before the arena fills back up on the promise of fresh leadership, there's a question that absolutely must be answered, because franchises that fire coaches without fixing the structural rot underneath them don't recover. They cycle, they burn through names on a whiteboard while the same broken decision-making architecture quietly guarantees the next failure before the new hire even runs their first practice. The Indiana Fever have a coaching problem, but they may have a front office problem that is significantly older, significantly deeper, and significantly more dangerous to Caitlin Clark's long-term future in Indianapolis. Here's the insight that changes the entire frame of this conversation. Coaching decisions don't exist in a vacuum. Roster construction, player development investment, the internal culture around how a franchise superstar is supported and protected, those are front office fingerprints. When a coach runs a system that visibly underutilizes a generational talent, the first question isn't why did the coach choose that system? The first question is, who hired the coach who approved the roster built around her? And who has been watching the slow-motion misalignment without pulling the emergency brake? That accountability trail doesn't end at the whiteboard in Stephanie White's office. And here's the emerging reality that every serious WNBA franchise is quietly grappling with right now. Because this isn't just a Fever problem. It's a league-wide inflection point. The economic explosion triggered by Caitlin Clark's arrival permanently raised the stakes of organizational competence in women's basketball. There is no more margin for front offices that operate on old assumptions about what WNBA fan bases will tolerate. The audience is bigger, more sophisticated, more financially empowered, and more connected than anything this league has previously managed. They will not quietly accept mediocrity packaged in institutional language. The Fever are simply the first organization to discover that the hard way, in public, at full volume, with 1,600 empty seats as evidence. Now ask yourself a question that actually determines Caitlin Clark's future. What happens if nothing structurally changes? The answer is not abstract. It is a timeline with a brutal endpoint. Clark is in the early prime of a career that has already redefined the commercial possibilities of women's professional sports. She is not going to quietly absorb seasons of organizational dysfunction without it affecting her trajectory, her development, her statistics, her legacy, and eventually her leverage. Generational talents and broken systems don't simply endure. They stagnate. And when a player of Clark's profile stagnates inside a dysfunctional organization, the story doesn't stay local. It becomes national. It becomes a story of how a franchise was handed the greatest gift in the history of their sport and fumbled it in front of the entire country. The Simon Ownership Group has two timelines in front of them right now. In the first timeline, they move decisively. They conduct a thorough, honest organizational audit, not just of the coaching staff, but of every layer of decision-making that produced this moment. They make hard, visible, credible changes. They communicate directly and transparently with a fan base that has demonstrated it is paying extraordinarily close attention. They recommit, publicly, financially, structurally, to building everything around protecting and maximizing Caitlin Clark. The seats fill back up. The sponsors stop quietly revising their models. The franchise recaptures the momentum that made it the hottest ticket in the world 12 months ago. In the second timeline, they hesitate. They issue statements. They make one visible change and hope it absorbs the pressure. They convince themselves that a winning streak will quiet the noise. The organized resistance doesn't quiet. It grows. The forward confidence of media partners continues eroding. And Caitlin Clark, patient, professional, and fiercely competitive, begins a quiet calculation that every elite athlete eventually makes inside a broken organization. The The window between those two timelines is not wide, and it is closing faster than the front office appears to understand. What we are watching in Indiana right now is bigger than a coaching controversy, bigger than a bad stretch of games, bigger than one disastrous press conference. We are watching the first major organizational reckoning of the post-Clark era in women's basketball. The first test of whether a WNBA franchise can be held accountable, not by a league office, not by the media, but by a fan base sophisticated enough to weaponize their own economic power. The fans found their leverage. They used it, and now every front office in this league is watching Indianapolis very carefully, because whatever happens next sets the precedent for all of them. The reckoning is here. The only remaining question is whether the people in that building are brave enough to face it honestly, or whether Caitlin Clark will ultimately be left to carry an organization that never deserved her. Three things are now undeniable. Empty seats are not apathy, they are strategy. A coaching change alone is not a solution. It is a distraction without structural reform underneath it. And Caitlin Clark's patience, like all finite things, has a limit that this organization cannot afford to find. The next move belongs to the Simon ownership group. Watch it carefully, because it will tell you everything about whether this franchise is genuinely committed to what was handed, or simply hoping the storm passes on its own. And if you want to understand what that next move should look like, and what comparable franchises did when they faced their own version of this moment, that conversation is coming. Stay close.